Hey, I'm Alison.
And I'm Aurora. Welcome to Game of the Year 2023.
We're a couple nerds who like to hang out and talk about everything we've watched and played and read over
Not me, I don't read.
Aurora doesn't know how to read, but I do.
Number 15.
Yeah, the mic needs to be pointing at you when you talk. We're just gonna get right into it.
Number 15, Bayonetta Origins, Cereza and the Lost Demon. Nintendo acquiring Platinum Games and rescuing their controversial flagship series Bayonetta from development hell may have been a surprising move coming from a family-friendly company, but taking that IP and transforming it into a fairy tale storybook adventure for all ages certainly wasn't. Although the shift in tone felt grating at first, Origins reveals its heart over time as you travel from one visually stunning vista to another within its impressively interconnected forest setting, and as the relationship between Cereza and her demon companion Cheshire grows deeper via both story and gameplay. The left stick controls the young witch, and the right stick controls Cheshire, which is a neat gimmick that works great for puzzles and a little less great for combat, the confusing nature of which necessitated breezy encounters to keep frustration down. Talent from Okami worked closely with this one, and it shows in nearly every way. Origins is one of the best looking games this year, and on the Switch no less.
Next, we have a game that a lot of people would disagree should be on the list, but here it is. Diablo 4. You fall to your knees in front of the altar of Diablo 2, weeping, practically crawling out of your skin with the curse of time eating away your once smooth and youthful flesh. Why has the goddess forsaken us? Where has the blizzard of yore gone? Suddenly, you hear a chorus of whispers, the voices of gamers like you, who still enjoy games that not everybody likes. You struggle to make out the clear words. In the cacophony of wretched tongues writhing around you, everything burns and then at once falls away. The void stretches out around you, a prison of your own mind, and you can still hear the whispers. They are, in fact, not of other gamers, not of reviewers or critics or Steam review bombers, but they're your own thoughts, your own memories, playing the game. Your pulverized landslide druid build and how it slams into enemies with a satisfying crunch, the addictive loop of the Tree of Whispers, fun community events, the little rituals like how players use the emote wheel to thank each other during Legion events, the haunting score with its echoing flute lines, and syrupy string orchestras tying knots in your mind, dripping honey over your heart, calling you deeper into the flawed world of Sanctuary. Your voice cuts through the madness and grief over time lost, through the pain of seeing beyond the curtain and realizing Blizzard is a fucked up company like most other corporations are. In a timbre so familiar yet uncanny, without the resonance of hearing it in your own body, you hear the words, D4, not bad. D4, good. D4 made by real people just like you who are all incredible artists. Fuck corporatism and capitalism. Art like D4 can still be appreciated even though it's part of this awful structure we live within, the very thing we often turn to games and other media to escape. It's not perfect, but you're already hooked on it, and it's genuinely fun. If you get tired of the endgame in D4, Path of Exile is right there, and it's pretty damn cheap to get all the way to the endgame. Even beating the campaign is free in that game. So do not despair. Do not hate yourself for enjoying your time in this world. Just do your thing. I love you. This one surprised me. Reviews everywhere point out all of Diablo 4's glaring flaws, its bloated macro-transactions, and corporate greed scarring the beautiful visage of a once legendary franchise, cast in blood-tinged bronze for all to weep on in the sudden loss of innocence that comes with the fall from nostalgic bliss into present-day mundanity. Yeah, it's a modern-ass corporate RPG, but it's way better than Starfield, it's more fun than Destiny 2, and it's going to change and hopefully improve a lot over the next few years. I'm glad I started playing in Season 2 rather than at launch, since there was not that much to do post-campaign at launch, and I'm extra glad Seasons are free. What's here now is really impressive, though. The score is in my top faves of probably all time. A very good case for why making up your own damn mind is a great idea.
Number 13, Cocoon. Cocoon drops you on an alien planet with no instructions or a single speaking soul. Soon you find that any given level is contained within an orb with a special ability that can be picked up and taken into another world like sci-fi Matryoshka dolls, and the game's best puzzles has you hopscotching between them. Each of these worlds is cryptic but cohesive, enmeshing organic and mechanical matter in a relentless display of stunning art design. I figure it must be easy enough to make a complicated puzzle game by cramming in extra steps and switches everywhere, but it takes a discerning eye to strike an effective balance. Cocoon pulls off this incredible magic trick of being obtuse on the surface but intuitive to actually play without sacrificing its mystery or challenge. It's the little things, like the rush of music every time you're on to the solution of a puzzle to signify progress, or gating off areas when you've got nothing left to do in them to minimize confused backtracking. But whoever thought it was a good idea to make you start over the otherwise awesome boss fights after a single hit is a little bit on the sadistic side, in my opinion. Number 12. Pikmin 4. For those unfamiliar, Pikmin is a cozy real-time strategy series that has you plucking adorable sentient subservient plant people from the ground to battle bug monsters with and retrieve precious artifacts back to your ship. One woman's earth trash is another Pikmin's treasure. I've always loved Pikmin's blend of realistic-ish environments and cartoony characters, but the gameplay itself has never gelled with me before due to a plethora of irritating quirks. Nintendo made strides with 4 in sandblasting away a lot of the series' frustrating qualities while adding some surprises, including some oddly survival horror-style twists, as well as multitasking pressure cooker Dandori battles, which, as a prep cook, I should have been great at, but wasn't. Number 11. Hi-Fi Rush. No more heroes, but for tweens doesn't exactly sound like a glowing endorsement, but I do mean it in the best possible way. The world of Hi-Fi Rush is a madcap comic strip blending rapid-fire character action with rhythm mechanics that permeate every single facet of the game. All attacks, all movement, and all environments are synchronized to an everlasting beat. My timing was woefully off at first, but it didn't take too long to become acclimated until I was seamlessly chaining my offense. This may be a flaw for some. By simply cycling through companion cooldowns constantly, I was able to XXXX combo my way to an S rank nearly every battle. For a genre I'm not particularly good at, I'll take the power fantasy. What I wasn't expecting was to find Hi-Fi Rush as funny as I did. It's increasingly rare that a game's animation is so superb and expressive that it transcends its cheesy tone, but I got swept up in it and had a dumb smile on my face throughout many of its cutscenes. Also, Dykes and Jorts, 10 out of 10. Number 10. Power Wash Simulator Expansions. Power Wash Simulator was given enough DLC in 2023 to double the content of the base game, first offering mud-soaked renditions of fellow Square Enix properties Tomb Raider and Final Fantasy VII before moving on to paid expansions based on SpongeBob SquarePants and Back to the Future. Power washing is undeniably a one-size-fits-all concept. I can't imagine any media franchise not slotting nicely into this template. But the work has been done to deliver the right amount of care and charm to these IPs. It's lacking in any sort of extrinsic value, but that's just the power washing way. 5 hours feels like 1. No challenge, no thinking, just something to do. My love for it is as unwavering as ever. Number 9. Blasphemous 2. I was never able to pay attention in church for longer than half a minute, so the story in Blasphemous 2 read as complete nonsense to me. It should serve as a double compliment then that my progress through its world was always compelling regardless, due to its sheer devotion to both Castlevania and Spanish Catholic iconography. The pixel art here is masterful and provocative and stays fresh and varied throughout its entire run. The monsters that populate this grim world are beautifully realized but typically just smashable roadblocks until the incredible boss battles rear their audacious heads to demonstrate just how robust the combat system actually is. I nearly quit after being stuck on the penultimate boss for hours, which really left me sore, but our strongest memories are forged in fire, I suppose. With excellent exploration and neat platforming segments to boast, Blasphemous 2 was my favorite side-scroller this year. Number 8. Final Fantasy XVI. You'll never get everything you want out of a Final Fantasy. Disappointment is kind of just woven into its fabric if you've been with the series long enough. Its longevity has simultaneously hinged on making its gameplay faster and simpler, its stories more grandiose and convoluted, and its production values exponentially bigger, all while courting old heads with nostalgia bait and familiar themes. I was introduced to the series with 7, and while I'd never insist Final Fantasy go back to the slower turn-based battle systems, there is a steep trade-off when sacrificing difficult strategic gameplay for mindless spectacle. It's fortunate, then, that Final Fantasy XVI throws its entire weight into technical wizardry and to create the most impressive shonen-ass fights possible. A dedication so absolute that it makes commands like, press L3 plus R3 to accept the truth, as endearing as it is cheesy. It's no exaggeration when I say that a selection of these segments are among the most jaw-dropping I've ever laid eyes on, and it carried me through even when the battle mechanics themselves did little to fuel my adrenaline. Outside of the brilliant Mother Crystal missions, Final Fantasy XVI can be a rather soporific and long-winded journey with its storytelling and transitional stages, utilizing a darker tone to prop up its Game of Thrones-esque tale of nations, politics, and war. When it comes to the aesthetics of Final Fantasy, I'm firmly rooted in the sci-fi camp, so I knew finding my footing in 16's more medieval high fantasy setting would be an uphill climb. But Square Enix has added the wonderful real-time lore feature that allows you to pause cutscenes at any time, giving you up-to-date information on the characters, locations, and factions. I would never have been able to pay as close attention as I did without it, although 16 does a bang-up job at immersing the player in other ways, whether it be the perfect soundtrack or its lush, naturalistic world that nearly feels like running through an apocalyptic Thomas Kincaid painting. The presentation here is absolutely sublime. Number 7. Humanity. I knew from the second I saw those legions of floppy, faceless people being strung along by a ghostly Shiba Inu to bubbly synthetic melodies that I would love this game. And when I found out the studio behind it also made Tetris Effect, my expectations swelled. That hype was met and surpassed after realizing humanity was so much more than a technically impressive take on Lemmings. Every few set of stages brings with it a new mechanic that dips its follow-the-leader premise into other genres like stealth, real-time strategy, and even arcadey shooting during unexpectedly grand boss battles. Not all of these genre switch-ups were winners with me, but humanity is so well-paced and fine-tuned that none of its whims were too much of a struggle. Having a video solution option for every puzzle was also a lifesaver, although it doesn't mark a path for the secondary objective, meaning you're still using your brain a lot. God damn, what a special game. Number 6.
Resident Evil 4 Remake.
I feel obligated to point out that the original Resident Evil 4 is in my top 10 games of all time. I also believe that if I were to play it again today, it probably wouldn't be. Despite wholly earning its status as one of the greatest and most influential games ever made, it's no surprise that there are aspects of it that haven't aged well. Visuals, controls, characterization, these would have been simple enough to update on their own, but Capcom went the whole 9 yards by rearranging everything about the level design to make use of Leon's deliberated movement. It's still hitting the same beats as before, but with a renewed purpose. Resident Evil 4 still feels like a grand linear adventure sweeping you from set piece to sweat piece, all the while ensuring each room serves as a thoughtful, intense combat arena. And despite stressing me out consistently, it was never too much to ruin the fun. I also want to give major props to Capcom for Leon's characterization specifically. He may be facing some of the most horrific scenarios and monsters possible, but he never stops eschewing hilarious action movie one-liners. He's also really sweet and supportive, subverting the archetype a bit. Leon's a himbo, and I love him. Every other character is also given room to grow and shine in this remake, but it's Leon I'm grateful we get to play as. Remake doesn't completely replace the original in my mind. There's a decent chunk of goofier bits that got cut to establish a darker atmosphere, for better or for worse, but it is without a doubt an essential experience whether or not you enjoyed the original. Number 5. Theater Rhythm Final Bar Line. I never thought I'd be able to classify a Final Fantasy game as a hidden gem, but Final Bar proved to be the most enjoyable title in the series I played since Final Fantasy X in 2001. Yeesh. It's a relatively simple rhythm title that'll take a moment to learn but many hours to master, given you've got the reflexes to match. In fact, this is one of the few games I've ever bumped up the difficulty to hard and even extreme towards the end because the mechanics were so intuitive and fun that the challenge was welcome. There's also the whole other side to the gameplay, which encompasses RPG leveling and strategy to reach for optional objectives, but I avoided those elements and still found Theater Rhythm to be one of the most devilishly addicting games I've ever played. It helps that the Final Fantasy series has had so much incredible music tied to it throughout the years that make for some thrilling levels, although the beatless orchestrated tracks understandably don't work quite as well. Number 4. The Talos Principle 2. You may have gathered from what I chose to play this year that puzzle games are just about my favorite genre, and the Talos Principle 2 did the best job of keeping my brain on its toes. Huh? In addition to all the mechanics from the first game, lasers, fans, switches, boxes, scanners are meaningful and tricky foils that'll have you gleefully playing hopscotch with portals, gravity shifting, Tetronimo bridges, and color theory? The Talos Principle 2 is a much more ambitious game than the first. You're no longer just going from room to room, but exploring entire ecosystems with clever hidden puzzles between them and characters to bounce ideas off of. It's also a sheer testament to its wondrous balance that I only required looking up solutions half a dozen times in my playthrough, and the final gauntlet stands out as one of my favorite gaming moments from this year. Stunning! Despite being a pretty enormous part of the game, I regularly fail to connect with the Talos Principle 2's story and philosophical musings. Using Prometheus and Pandora's box as a base, the game spends an inordinate amount of time circling around similarly worded questions about whether to trust technology or to be scared of it. The stories of these games have always been a patchwork of meandering quotes and journal entries, acting as a thought experiment, grab bag, or intellectual Rorschach test. My disdain of academia may have kneecapped my overall enjoyment of Talos Principle 2, but I can't deny that there were a handful of moments that inspired awe. Number 3, and my personal number 1, The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. What Nintendo has done to revolutionize the open world formula with Breath of the Wild has been tinkered with and improved drastically in Tears, setting an incredibly high bar for the rest of the industry going forward, while still shouldering nearly every flaw Breath of the Wild had. It's a mixed bag with highs so high that it makes me sad I'll never get to experience this game for the first time again, but there's still a lot of room for improvement. What makes Tears of the Kingdom such a truly special game lies in its innovative new abilities. Ascend, which allows you to push through the roofs of structures and caverns as life-saving shortcuts. Recall, which allows you to rewind the trajectory of items, including vehicles you've careened off a cliff. Fuse, which allows you to craft wonky new weapons and arrow configurations at any time, each with their own unique properties. And Ultra Hand, which allows you to stick together practically any material in the game, whether it be to make a vehicle, a structure, or just some ungodly monstrosity for your own sick amusement. I crafted so many dodgy pieces of shit that either immediately imploded or came undone seconds before reaching my destination. With an impressive physics engine holding the chaos together, the results were often unpredictable and hilarious. Tears of the Kingdom, more than any game this year, put the fun back in failing. Tears of the Kingdom's massive hype and player base, plus its immersive sim-style gameplay, prompted millions of people to share knowledge about its many neat tricks and glitches right out the gate, lending sort of an asynchronous multiplayer energy to the experience. I don't usually play games upon release, so it was a communal feeling I really enjoyed, particularly with my best friend Alison, who is sharing this list with me this year. We text as we always do or meet up to talk about our unique journeys through the game. Mine mostly began with shrine hunting. Shrines make their return as dispensers to level up your health and stamina. The shrines placed out in the open are typically the most interesting ones, containing puzzle rooms that allow you to use your tools to concoct bizarre counterintuitive solutions to basic problems. Unless it's one of the many proving ground shrines that strip you of your gear, forcing you to really think on your feet, which is simultaneously frustrating and exhilarating. Some shrines only have one way to solve them, and these were often ingeniously constructed enough to pass as a standard stage in a more concentrated puzzle game. Unfortunately, the hidden shrines are usually filler content with copy and pasted green crystal quests, or simply have nothing in them at all but the upgrade. They're more exciting to find than mediocre caves, but their missed potential still stings when the best of them are so damn good. I finished my shrine hunting around 70 hours, and it's in the stretch that a lot of other aspects of Tears of the Kingdom began wearing thin as well. The Sky Islands feel the most copy and pasted of all, offering the same few formats and no visual variety to differentiate them from one zone to the next. Mini-bosses repeat so often you're practically incentivized to avoid combat altogether. The caves in the depths, while neat at first, only offer rewards that aren't particularly useful past the midpoint. The menus are extremely clunky once you've accumulated hundreds of items and are trying to fuse something together on the fly. The frame rate dips get pretty distracting, especially once you have all your party members, and the process of finding them and activating their powers during combat is so messy and awkward it's bewildering that Nintendo okayed it. 90% of the side quests are forgettable and not really worth doing. The voice acting will probably be grating to anyone over the age of 10. The good here far outweighs the bad, but these are all still worth mentioning. Endgame, spoiler alert. For all this series' returning faults, and its brand new ones, I think the improvements made in the story missions, dungeons, and cutscenes are undeniable. I don't usually care about fantasy stories, but the imagery here used is so Ghibli-esque, I couldn't help but give myself over to it. The entire final sequence, to that Ganondorf holy shit life bar extension moment, to the dragon fight in the sky, had me captivated. And despite fridging Zelda yet again, it was done so artfully that I almost didn't mind. Like, you spend so much time in this world collecting memories in the form of dragon's tears, trying to piece together where Zelda is, and eventually find out that the tears belong to Zelda herself, who has transformed herself into that dragon to preserve the world. For fantasy reasons. The same dragon that has been in the background this whole time, suddenly imbued with meaning and context. Zelda stories don't usually reach for that sort of thing, and it made the spectacular final scenes all the more sweeter.
Yeah, Tears of the Kingdom was pretty good. This ended up being mostly Aurora's list because a lot of the games that I've been playing did not come out this year, especially Destiny 2. I am glad to be kicking that addiction slowly but surely. Anyway, Aurora was kind enough to give me the top spots on this review list because she didn't play Baldur's Gate 3, and we both played Alan Wake 2.
Alan Wake 2 is just Kingdom Hearts for horror nerds.
And she's right, but I have more words than that to say about it. Na 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 na, champion of light. Achi's been humming in my head since I saw that musical sequence on the launch of the game. Where do I even begin? I once took a summer camp for high school film nerds at a local film studio. That was my peak movie buff phase. I watched 68 movies over July and August that year. I remember one of the camp instructors talking about David Lynch's Inland Empire, calling it a masterpiece fever dream, pure intuition in a way only Lynch could pull off. As I watched Yosun Yo in the theater near the climax of Alan Wake 2, I knew that movie in particular rubbed off on Sam Lake. Sure enough, he posted a stack of media from his writing desk during some Alan Wake 2 post-launch promo, and Inland Empire was clearly visible in that stack. Remedy have always been a favorite studio of mine. Max Payne was one of my first serious games that really showed me how good stories could be in the gaming space. They've been doing great ever since. Even their hammiest narratives are full of charm and wit, an edge that you only find in their games. The narrative and art direction of Alan Wake 2 take the studio to a new level of authorship, which I love, and I don't even care about authors in film anymore. 15 years ago, I never would have dreamed someone would make a game this deliciously surreal that I would actually get to play and replay. I don't even care that the combat and puzzle mechanics are just ripped from Resident Evil 4. Anything more complex, and I think it would have detracted from the heavy narrative focus. There isn't too much to say that hasn't already been said here, apart from my personal attachment to this game. I played through Alan Wake 1 for the first time in the week before Alan Wake 2's launch, during my first NaNoWriMo competition, where writers spend all of November trying to pump out 50,000 words on a novel by the end of the month. As I wandered into Alan Wake's world, I got to weave my own, bouncing back and forth between the game, my writing, all the horror books I've been revisiting, and even good old Stephen King and the spirit of Wake's influences. This game is more than a game to me. It is a transcendent interdisciplinary work of art that encompasses so many key threads of inspiration and world building and narrative charm that it helped me get through a major turning point in my own creative career. This isn't just an escape, it's not just a cool distraction or entertainment, not even a one-and-done philosophical walking sim or puzzle game that got me thinking for a week and then faded away. It's a fucking masterpiece. I know that's entirely subjective, and I don't care. And now the obvious number one spot that is very anticlimactic because we all know what it is: Baldur's Gate 3. CRPGs have always been my favorite genre. I've been on the fence about getting a tattoo of Torment on my shoulder, referencing Planescape since I played it about 6 years ago. There are so many gems in this genre, this precious format that's so damn close to just reading a book while you're on the computer, and I deeply appreciate the kind of world building this genre can provide. It already felt like the home of some of the best writing in all of gaming. And then Baldur's Gate 3 came along and bear clawed the doors off the hinges, stormed in the room, bellowed, "I just rolled a nat 20 on a charisma check and I'm horny as fuck. Don't care what's in your pants, who all is down, right here, right now." Player choice is finally making a resurgence in game design. With games like Baldur's Gate 3 and Tears of the Kingdom, the immersive sim nerds in the back of the room are nodding along, saying "I told you so's," while the modern RPG Bethesda sluts are unlocking new kinks and getting their straight pride tattoos filled in with rainbows and corrective surgery. The amount of freedom is overwhelming if you're not used to it, and even after a proper 120-hour playthrough, I know for sure I have at least 2 or 3 more full runs of Baldur's Gate 3 before I really feel like I've seen a good chunk of what this game has to offer.
You start thinking about your next playthrough halfway through the first. I still dream about the one after, since my initial second character plans got sidelined by the call to follow the Dark Urges story, which I hadn't experienced at all. I always start these games as a goody two-shoes, thieving everything not bolted down as long as no one's looking while keeping a good face on in public. My next character is going to be a shit-faced manipulative bard gnome. Maybe my dark urge will fall somewhere in the middle, occasionally indulging in murder, yet veering away from the edge with the influence of Karlach and her sweet, sweet tiefling chaos grin. It's like an incredible fantasy series that you get to decide every step in, and every time you reread it, you get to read a different book. A choose-your-own-adventure for the nerdy elder gaze. I can see someone not playing this game if complexity and coloring outside the lines are unappealing to them, yet that's just a matter of personal taste. The fact here is that Baldur's Gate 3 has so much heart, so much meaningful content, so much depth and nuance and room to play that it stands apart from just about everything put out in the last 10 years. The fact that it isn't for everyone is simply because nothing has universal appeal without compromise. Larian's masterful display of craft and care for the medium puts this work in a category of its own, timeless, worthy of looking back on with fondness, and in my case, never uninstalling, just in case I get that urge to come back for just one more run, see what else is hiding in the branching paths untrodden. It's stuff like this that makes me feel fucking awesome about being alive and grateful for my sentience in spite of the horrors of the world. There's no higher praise I can give a work of art these days.
Stop the press. I totally did play Baldur's Gate 3. I did the character customization screen. I was there for like an hour. I made a really hot woman, and then I had to immediately close the game and mash one out. But I totally played Baldur's Gate 3, so that's all.
Just because I wrote a whole review for it, even though it's not in our top 15, here's an honorable mention for Starfield. We all know the criticisms of it, how outdated it is, how Bethesda has been a corporate joke since Skyrim, how Todd Howard's chess club seagull-style management ass face has been the dartboard of tens of thousands of reviewers and content creators worldwide. But did you know? It's not that bad. And it's one of the only games I played this year that came out in 2023. I'm a space nerd, and I have been since I was a kid. By the time I was 3, I could name the planets in our humble solar system in order, or in Sol. R.I.P. Pluto. I could order breakfast at a diner, 2 eggs, poached medium rye toast, sausages, same thing I'm ordering 28 years later. And soon after all that, I started cussing like a fucking sailor. To say that Starfield would have been my dream game if it worked out was an understatement. I've played tons of other space sims, X4, No Man's Sky, Elite Dangerous, and they all lacked a certain something. The resource management of No Man's Sky was tedious as hell, and for me, couldn't be saved by the dozens of expansions they've added on, though I did get a solid 80 hours out of it. Elite was a make-your-own fun kind of space sim, and despite knowing it had no story, I thought the intricacies of its systems could carry it anyway. Not really. X4 is still on top of my list of games to go back to since I love the idea of simulating a whole economy and world at once, and the combat in that game is pretty great. Still, the story is really bare bones and is much more of a sandbox than anything else. So Starfield was something I looked forward to. I didn't have high hopes, but I did figure it'd have that certain core narrative to tie everything else together, the main thing missing from all those other space sims. It does. It's just not very good. It's just fine. I enjoy a lot of older Bethesda games, and I can get behind the limits of the creation engine as long as it's in service of a world to wander in. In Starfield, the only way to feel like the world was a continuous experience was to spend 20 to 30 hours in photo mode. That way, when I get bounced between loading screens, I get to look back on all the cute moments, imitating Ingmar Bergman movie stills with Andreja and black and white and filters, neatly arranging the VHS tapes and stuffed animals in my cozy bachelor suite on... I had to look this up because the locations are so not memorable. Aquila City, to mimic my real-life apartment, hazy New York street chic, in the underlevel of New Atlantis with awkward, bulging-eyed grandmas staring at the walls. It's like Starfield had the one thing I wanted the other space sims to have, and I ditched it in favor of the sandbox and made my own fun, like I was supposed to do in all those other games. It was fun enough to get me to put 120 hours into it. The writing even made me laugh a couple times. definitely not a bad game, just not a very good one either. Starfield is most definitely one of the games of all time. IGN was right.